David Pakman is, of course, our young progressive radio talk show host, nationally syndicated. He's out in Western Massachusetts, hosts a daily program. David, when's your program on the air? At what time?
Monday through Thursday, p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific.
Great. David, you're obviously a close observer of the scene, as it were, this being a very important election, as is every election every 4 years, going back to the founding of the Republic. It looks to me like today, and you're a partisan Democrat. I think it's fair to say that. And
well, actually, I'm independent. I am not registered with any party.
Understood. But I have no problem saying that I'm a supporter of Mitt Romney. I'm also independent, but I'm fairly partisan this election.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, no, I'm certainly voting for Barack Obama, but in terms of party, I consider myself a progressive above any party membership.
Right, I understand that, and I tend to be the same. In fact, a lot of talk show hosts tend to be independents, mainly, I think, because we come across all sorts of points of view, and we don't generally like to be blocked into a political party.
Well, that may be the case. For example, I've always been independent. Bill O'Reilly, though, used to be a Republican, but for political expediency and being able to say he wasn't, he changed his party registration, which was interesting.
Right, and of course, there are very partisan talk show hosts. Rush Limbaugh is an open and unabashed Republican,
right.
And he will not speak ill of, anyone who is not, who is a Republican. And you get the same thing with Democrats. David, you with the election coming up, you say you're a supporter of Barack Obama. Make a case. Why should this country and the voters in this country re-elect Barack Obama? What has he done to warrant another term in office, in your opinion?
Well, let's first, to put some context in there, I am not one of these guys that prays to the shrine of Barack Obama in any way. In other words, I'm voting for President Obama because I think right now it's getting into late October. Realistically, there's only two people that might be the president in 2013. Of those two, I believe that Barack Obama is the better choice. Now, that being said, there's many things that I would prefer President Obama do differently. But to your question, I can't think of a worse direction for the country to go than to have someone like Mitt Romney take over the White House, whether it's everything from his incredible non-stance on absolutely every political issue over time that makes it clear the guy has absolutely no personal morals beyond saying what would be politically expedient at the time, the fact that he's made this case that even though here in Massachusetts he actually is very responsible for the Romney Care program on which Obamacare is actually based. He actually says he would repeal and replace Obamacare, although he also says that he would replace it with a lot of the same things that are in Obamacare. It's just a complete nightmare. This is a very short window of time now where before all of Obamacare is enacted, Republicans might be able to get it repealed or overturned or not funded, because the reality is in 2 years, in 2014, when Obamacare is fully enacted, everybody's going to realize that it's a very good thing and it will become impossible to ever overturn it. So we have this short window of time where it's possible, and we have to make sure Mitt Romney doesn't do that. I could go on for hours, but I know you probably have more questions.
Well, I think that we can all express opinions regarding what we think, and we can project in the future what might happen with Obamacare and whether or not people are going to like it, and we could talk about that, both pro and con. But my question to you, David, is a much more positive. Okay. Wait a minute. No, I think we could, because none of us are Nostradamus. We can't look into a crystal ball and know for sure how people are going to feel about it.
No, but we can look at every other country that's done similar things and how popular it is. So I think we know it's very
No,
clear.
I think we could look at this
Republicans
country.
know it.
David, I'm getting to a question here. David, I'm getting to a question. And no, I don't think we can know. There are a lot of things in other countries that they do that are not popular here. But my question to you is a more positive one, and that is that the Obama administration has been in place for 4 years. Yeah. I want to know, not me personally, but speaking in the broad sense, what recommends Barack Obama for another 4 years? Not what doesn't recommend Mitt Romney. What, right, in a positive sense, why should the American voter take a look at the last 4 years of President Obama and say, I am really very excited about casting a vote for him and for his administration because I want 4 more years of it?
So what kind of a list do you want? Just a list in order of importance, or what
why don't we try to, given the fact that we have limited time and that you and I are fairly experienced communicators, why don't we try to boil it down to a brief, and I know I'll ask you the question that Hillel was asked in the days of the Romans. Could he explain the belief in Judaism while standing on one foot? And he issued one sentence. So I'm going to ask you to explain why we should reelect Barack Obama while standing on one foot.
Sure. Well, listen, Obamacare, reason number 1. Reason number 2, losing an incredible number of jobs per month after one of the biggest bunglings of the economy we've seen in the last 100 years into positive job creation, private sector job growth, which is actually what Republicans want to see, recovering, unemployment dropping, coming out, repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, one of the most discriminatory policies that we've ever seen, no negative consequences after 1 year, obvious, the rights of people, no-brainer. Signing I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, so far we have that he's going to create jobs and that he's going to support Obamacare, which you claim everybody's happy about.
Well, he's already said that he's going to support those. He's already done those things. We have it on the record. And not only that, it's no surprise because if you look back at the last 80 years, Democrats have created millions more jobs than Republicans. Democrats have presided over exponentially higher stock market gains than have Republicans. What evidence can we point to that there's any advantage on the economy to electing a Republican? I don't see any evidence.
I would say the Reagan administration comes to mind, and I would say that I would dispute your claim. I mean, this is really a rather partisan comment, but I think that what's putting aside who's
dispute it with numbers. What did I say that you dispute?
I dispute the comment made with regard to the creation of jobs. Although there have been some Democrats like John F. Kennedy who implemented the largest tax cut since World War II that led to the creation of jobs. And it's not really a partisan matter, it's more of an economic matter. It's which policies economically tend to result in an expansion in capital and an expansion in general overall economic health. And
that's a good point.
Those policies, wait a minute,
Chuck,
David, I'm not finished with my sentence.
These are just numbers, Chuck.
Those comments also can be, those comments, those policies can be and have been implemented by both Democrats and Republicans. It's not really
so why
a
is
partisan
it that the
matter.
Democrats create more jobs? Why? I mean, let's just look at the numbers.
Because thank you for asking. I'm going to answer the question. David, I'm going to answer that question. You've asked me a question. Why do, quote, Democrats create more jobs? My answer to that is that regardless of whether the president is a Democrat or Republican, the presidents that have created more jobs have been the presidents who have cut taxes and who have allowed the private sector to expand, and that includes Democrats, like, as I said, John F. Kennedy.
So therefore,
no, wait a minute. No, that is correct, and I'm going to make the case. I'll give you 3 examples.
Sure.
Kennedy, Harding, Reagan. All 3 had major tax cuts, and all 3 led to an economic period of expansion. Now, and also Franklin Roosevelt cut taxes, and he cut the size of government drastically, and that helped improve the Depression. It's not a matter of partisan. It's a matter of now taking a look at the 2 candidates, whether they're Democrat or Republican. Taking a look at the present. Wait a minute. I'm not finished. You can inject something after I finish my sentence. Thank you. Asking which of these 2 candidates is going to implement a policy that is more economically favorable for the coming decade, and which one is more likely to do what, as you said, presidents who have expanded the economy in the past, whether they be Democrats or Republicans, have done, which is to reduce or at least hold the line on tax increases and further do what used to be called good government, which is to streamline the size of government. Now, I know Barack Obama has done some of that, but we have to ask ourselves,
when can I talk
about
the numbers? Let me know when I can talk about the numbers.
Sure, you can talk about it now.
Okay, here are the numbers. Republicans have created 23.9 million jobs over the last 50 years. Democrats have created... I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, where did you get that figure? And I mean, that's like an incredible figure.
These are from the Bureau of Labor. Chuck, I'm sorry. Can I just get a word in here and get the numbers out and cite them, and then you can respond? I mean, give
Bureau
me a
of Labor Statistics. Okay, go ahead.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is often cited by Republicans as where we go for numbers, indicates that since 1961, 24 million jobs have been created under Republican presidents, 42 million jobs have been created under Democrats. Now, let's examine that further before you interject. For example, George W. Bush, who, as you said, decreased taxes, particularly on the rich, exhibited a decline of 646,000 jobs. You mentioned Ronald Reagan as a job creator, and indeed, if we look at the last 5 Republican presidents, Ronald Reagan did oversee the biggest increase in jobs. He had 14.7 million. More than half of the jobs Republicans created were created by Ronald Reagan. What you didn't mention is that after decreasing taxes, he increased them 9 times. Let's take Democrats now. President Obama, a very low level of job increase because we had such a disastrous economy initially, is already net positive 332,000. So again, 24 million new jobs under Republicans, 42 million new jobs under Democrats. The numbers are very, very clear. That's all people need to know. It would be too much of a coincidence if you analyze the statistics from a statistician point of view. The numbers are too overwhelming to argue that it was simply chance or that it was the effect of the previous guy who was in office, which is a common ruse we hear.
Well, you know, David, I'm glad that you're arguing for conservative principles. And again, I'll mention, as
I've
I
not
said
argued
before,
for one conservative principle.
Excuse me.
As
I mentioned before your comments, to me, this is not a partisan matter. It's which administration presides over a more conservative policy. And as far as more jobs created under Democrats, I would argue that is because the Democratic administration in question had a more conservative economic policy. And I would specifically point to the Kennedy administration, which in 1962, after President Kennedy delivered a speech saying that a rising tide lifts all boats, they enacted the largest tax cut since World War II.
And you know what? Of the five, we can't count Barack Obama yet because his presidency is not over, but of the 4 Democrats that are on the list since 1961, Kennedy is actually one who created the fewest jobs. So the idea that
he died shortly after he enacted.
He created 2.7 million jobs. It's the fewest of any of the last 4 Democrats. So his conservative policy did not create the most jobs. He's actually at the bottom of the list.
David, that's because he was murdered shortly after enacting that tax increase. So it's not fair to just take a look at these things. Excuse me, David. It is unfair to look at these things in such a stark context because that's not how economy works. The huge tax. Wait a minute. The huge tax. No, I don't care what Republicans do. I'm talking about what economists do. And that tax cut, which was enacted just less than a year before he was murdered, resulted in the economic growth of the 1960s. So you can't look at these things. And, Democrats like to say, well, Barack Obama inherited the disaster of the last few months of the Bush administration, and they're quite right to do so. But the fact is that you can't blame Barack Obama for all of that, nor can you praise, Democrats for positive policies, as in this case we're talking about the Kennedy administration. So, to look at these things as a cutoff in terms of the exact number of days somebody serves in office, you have to look at overall economic policies. And it's my contention here that the more conservative economic policies, and in this case we're talking about Kennedy's tax cuts, resulted in more prosperity over a period of time. It wasn't just during the brief period of his presidency. Now, as far as the numbers with regard to George W. Bush's administration, after having gotten hit by the attack of 9/11, and after the fact that Clinton, who had a very conservative administration after Newt Gingrich became Speaker, that he left Bush with a bad economy in the last year of his administration. Nevertheless, those were years of moderate growth until the last year of the Bush administration with Nancy Pelosi as the head of Congress, and there were all of these enormous tax increases. Bush didn't really stand up to that very well until toward the end. And by the way, those tax increases not only were supported by Nancy Pelosi, but they were also supported by the Democratic Senate, and they were voted upon by none other than Democratic Senator Barack Obama. So in a sense, Obama continued the policy, not of tax increases, but in this case of expanding spending. And I know that it's said of Bush that he left an enormous debt, and that's true. Although Obama has increased it more in his term, which is not quite 4 years, than Bush did in 8, and most of the Bush spending occurred after Nancy Pelosi became Speaker of the House. Bush, again, he didn't do a good enough job of standing up to that. Now, I'm, again, not bringing this up for partisan issues. You know, we could talk about Democrat or Republican.
Chuck, and again, maybe I can just get a word in edgewise here. The problem is, when we look at this broad statement that you've made, it's always the same from the conservative right, which is this. We have to find specific reasons why every time Republicans lost jobs, it was because of something Democrats did, and every time Democrats gained jobs, it was because of something Republicans did. Even what you just cited there, that President Obama and the tax increase, and the debt increase, that is again another ruse. President Obama has presided over the smallest percentage increase in the deficit since Dwight D. Eisenhower. That's a fact. Bureau of Labor Statistics, which Republicans love to talk about. I encourage your audience to look it up. I'm sure they will. I'm sure they're very, very smart.
Well, I'd like you to elaborate on that a little bit, David.
They can't be bamboozled by this nonsense that we're hearing from the right on the economy.
Straighten us out.
Very clear.
Straighten us out. I mean, the conventional comments made and made by Republicans, you're quite right, and others, is that the Obama administration has, first of all, they've not had any, they haven't had a budget passed through Congress in the past 3 years, including one in which they got 0 votes, including no Democrats who voted for it. But putting that aside, the conventional wisdom holds that Barack Obama increased the national debt by $5 trillion. Now, you're telling me that we're being bamboozled by that? Please explain and elaborate on your position on that.
I'm not sure what you want me to elaborate on.
I want you to answer to the conventional claim made by not just Republicans but by others that the national debt has increased under the Obama administration by $5 trillion.
Okay, so
now you say we're being fooled. That's a Republican talking point. Well, fine. What has happened? My understanding,
I can tell you what has happened.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So according to the Congressional Budget Office as well as Haver Analytics, if we look back at the slowest annualized federal spending growth, President Obama from 2010 to 2013 has had annualized federal spending growth of only 1.4%. For comparison, the highest since 1982 on this list was Ronald Reagan with 8.7% annualized federal spending growth, followed by Bush 1, Clinton, and then Bush 2. So again, since 1982, President Obama has presided over the smallest annualized federal spending growth.
Okay.
And again, Congressional Budget Office, another nonpartisan group that Republicans often point to, as well as Democrats. Those are the numbers.
All right.
So
no, thank you.
You're being convinced by talking points. You're doing the thing, Chuck, where you say, Republicans are saying this, therefore it's true. But where's the data?
No.
The data is the opposite.
You're talking about something that's different than my question. I mean, annualized spending growth does not answer the actual increase of the debt, regardless of the percentage of spending growth as compared in a ratio to the economy as a whole. Reagan did increase the growth, mainly because when he was asked which does he prefer, balancing the budget or improving the national security, he said, I choose national security, and that's a controversial position to take. But my question is not the percentage of annual growth from any administration. My question again, and this is the statement that's made, is and again, this is conventional definition, that when Obama took office, the national debt was, I think it was $10 trillion, give or take. What's a trillion here and there, right, David, between friends?
Right. Okay.
And now it's $16 trillion. Now, I mean, I might have the actual figures wrong, but I think that in the general ballpark, the conventional wisdom is that that's an increase in $5 trillion. And regardless of the percentage of national growth, I'm talking about absolute debt. And also the deficit, as we found out last week, has just topped $1 trillion. And Timothy Geithner is trying to tell us, don't worry about that, it's okay. But my question to you again, and try to answer it directly rather than talk about another subject, is did the national debt increase by $5 trillion under the Obama administration? Yes or no?
Well, what does it mean to say under the Obama administration?
It means from January 20th of 2009 until today, the time he's been in office. His watch, as they say in slang.
Certainly, there was legislation signed which accounted for about a third of the $5.2 trillion in deficits that we've seen since 2009. So we'll talk about what Obama is responsible for.
Sure.
There's the Stimulus Act, right, which of course you mentioned. That's the 2009 TARP, as it's known, American Recovery Reinvestment Act. And then there is the tax relief unemployment reauthorization, right, which is extending the Bush tax cuts and the Social Security payroll tax, and that's about $800 billion. Now, we have to take into consideration with the first one, of those $831 billion, that includes through 2019. So really we have to take just the portion that applies to when President Obama was actually in office. So, no, I would disagree that President Obama is responsible for the $5.2 trillion in deficit that you're talking about.
Okay, well, you've done a good job of explaining exactly how, or at least partially explaining, how that deficit was incurred. I think that the general rule of thumb, and this is certainly one that's brought up by many liberal Democrats, and rightfully. I mean, I just had Mike Lux on the air, who's an advisor to the Clinton administration.
Have had him on this time.
Yeah, that basically what happens under the watch of the president is their record, and that he accuses Republicans of saying, oh, well, it's not on, it wasn't his. But the point is that we're talking here about Obama's watch on the economic matters. And
there's no question the deficit keeps going up under all parties. I'm not going to argue with you on that. If we want to get specific and kind of have a more nuanced conversation, I would say that President Obama is responsible for around 35% of the deficit since 2009. That's kind of where I would put it.
All right. Well, look, I would say that any president is responsible for the deficit, whether it be Obama or Clinton or anyone else, under their administration, and that we have to examine their policies and how they contributed to that deficit.
So on that note, I think we have to also consider that one of the other great things about Obamacare is that by all accounts, it is deficit negative or at the very least deficit neutral over 10 years.
Well, that's because it's coming out of the pockets of every man, woman, and child in this country, But in the tune of $4,000.
Well, but they'll save a ton of money by not having uninsured people running up bills at the emergency room, and we're going to have less abortions because of access to birth control. All of these things have been studied extensively.
Yeah, and I think that Mitt Romney actually has the best answer to that, which is those are things, and he supports the Romney Care in Massachusetts, even though I have questions about it. And his comments are that very similar to Franklin Roosevelt's comments, which is that the states are the great laboratories of democracy, and that such matters as implementing health policies are best done by the individual states, depending upon their unique and particular needs, which are different state by state, rather than have this national program. I understand. Anyway, David, as always, I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
And we should do it again soon. You're very well informed and well articulated on your issues. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
Informed and well articulated on your issues. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
Informed and